Please welcome State Treasurer Dale Folwell.
How's that for the sound guy? Good. Thank you all for having me. I have been to in this room speaking many times over the last 13 years, and let me just take a moment before I get into my unprepared remarks to talk about standing on the shoulders. I was a freshman in 2005 in the legislature, and I had things that I wanted to work on that saved lives, saved minds, and saved money for North Carolinians. And but for John Locke giving me an audience in a room like this, it was over tacos or barbecue or something at that time. It helped me gain the confidence that I needed, because for the first 6 years I was in the General Assembly, I was in the minority party. And my point of bringing attention to that is that every young legislator, no matter if they're in the minority or the majority, needs an audience like this to kind of hone their skills and their message. And I appreciate Donna inviting me here today to talk about undoubtedly will be the biggest challenge of my personal and professional career, and that is to be the 28th Treasurer of North Carolina. My wife, as we're sitting here today, she is I'm going to move this up a little bit. She's a paid docent at Old Salem, and those of you who are familiar with Old Salem know that there are some ladies who walk around there who look like they're 250 years old, and she's the cutest one. She's the cutest 250-year-old woman down there. And the reason that I mention her is that any public servant, I want you to consider this, even the public servants that you don't like or don't agree with, don't ever underestimate the importance that their family places in them being a public servant. Because generally when folks like me are out making talks like this, and we're getting this affirmation and this back and forth, oftentimes it's the people who are the family members that really suffer through the public servant's life. So when you pray for a public servant, always pray for their family too. The main reason I mention her is that she's a musician and an artist. And when she does something for you, you can see it or you can hear it. I work on the invisible. I work on the things you can't see and you can't hear until something goes wrong and somebody has to fix them, and that's what I do. The poet T.S. Eliot once said that hell is where nothing connects. Everything that I'm getting ready to talk about over the next 45 minutes connects to something that impacts every single person in this room and every citizen of this state. So I'm going to leave a lot of time at the end of my talk for Q&A. So let's talk about two big invisible things. One is the state pension plan. Now, the state pension plan, along with the supplemental plan and the other responsibilities that I have, is the 26th largest pool of public money in the world in one place. And what makes that unique is that Harlan Bowles, who is considered the best state treasurer of the 20th century, who was from North Carolina, said in his book, The Keeper of the Public Purse, that the state treasurer has more constitutional and statutory responsibilities and duties than any other elected official except for the governor. And I'm sure he said except for the governor when he was referring to the governor having command of the National Guard, which is a huge responsibility of the governor of North Carolina. So the state pension plan has about $92 billion in it right now. The challenge with the state pension plan is reflected in this chart that I'm getting ready to hold up. Now, some smart aleck at the treasurer's office decided to take this chart back to 1958, which is the year I was born. So this is my life, so to speak, John. So the blue line is, I hope you can see that, the blue line represents Treasury bond rates over that period of time. The red line is the assumed rate of return that this $92 billion has to grow at in order to pay people a benefit for the rest of their life. I emphasize the term rest of their life because no one anticipated back in 1958 the blessed event of increased life expectancies, especially among females. Now, women, I guess, are very happy about this. The life expectancy of males has actually gone down each year for the last 2 years. And the life expectancy of females is going up. The reason I point that out to your attention is that when you don't earn this red line here, the 7.25%, then it's really hard to keep your promise. Now, there's no danger of that promise not being kept in North Carolina. As a matter of fact, it's one of the most solvent pension plans in the United States. And if you look at what's occurring in South Carolina, which I'll bring you an example in just a moment, you'll realize how bad things can get how quickly. And I'm trying to prevent that from happening as the keeper of the public purse. The green line, which is far more esoteric, this is the multiplier line. The multiplier line reflects what you multiply the years of service by times the average of the last 4 years of pay, and that determines the check that the folks get for the rest of their life. So as you can see here, and Representative Horn has heard about this from me for at least the last 10 years, as you can see here is as interest rates went up, all Treasurer Bowles had to do was to buy Treasury bonds, and he could, I don't golf, but he could break par on this red line. And then as interest rates went up and as this plan got easier to invest and it got better funded, then what you saw is this green line starting to go up from here. Now the green line represents payouts. In the last 30 days, I paid out $500 million in retirement benefits to North Carolina retirees. And I will pay that out every 30 days this year. That's a run rate of $6 billion a year out of the state pension plans and the Elders plan. And that $6 billion is going to $9 billion over the next 10 years. Now, so what's happened is that interest rates fell. None of these other things fell with it. So the first thing that I've done as the state treasurer through a board of trustees, even though I'm the sole fiduciary of this plan, is that we are gradually starting to lower this assumed rate of return. Because we have not achieved 7.25% rate of return in your pension plan on average this century. As a matter of fact, in the last fiscal year, and not many people except Representative Horn thinks in terms of fiscal year, but in the last fiscal year ending June 30th, the pension plan earned less than 1%. Now, you all know about the eighth wonder of the world, the compounding of interest. So when you're supposed to earn 7.25 and you have a year where you earn less than 1, or you have a tech crisis and a 9/11 crisis in 2001, or you have a housing crisis in 2008, you can quickly realize how you can get behind and how fast. In addition to this pension plan earning less than 1% for the last fiscal year, it paid out $600 million in fees to Wall Street. The $600 million has gone up 1,000% in the last 15 years. When Harlan Bowles left office, he was paying about $50 million in fees. And last year, the Treasurer's Office paid over $600 million in fees. So what we're trying to do with the pension plan is we're trying to reduce complexity and build value for the participants and the taxpayers of this state. So how have we done that? Well, for the first 100 days, on 12-minute intervals, I called 175 money managers and asked them some basic North Carolina questions. Who are you? Where are you? How good are you? And how much am I paying you? You know, you can get a lot accomplished with those 4 questions in a 12-minute conversation. And you'll be surprised at what we found. And during that process, for the first 100 days, we've cut out about $36 million in Wall Street fees. Now, that's a 4-year run rate because my pledge was to cut out $100 million over my first term. So we have far exceeded that, but that $36 million only represents about 7% of the fees that I'm paying. So we have a lot of room to grow. Now I see some folks that are kind of getting a little nauseous about me using all these numbers, so I need to like shock you for a moment. Last week we cut out $2.3 million in fees out of the defined contribution plan, the 401k, the 403b, and the 457 that no one has ever talked about. And John, what we found is that we had a money manager who was managing money for us on the second floor in the pension plan and also managing money for us on the first floor in the defined contribution plan. They should have been giving us the breakpoint advantage of all of that buying power for the state of North Carolina, and they were charging one fee on the second floor and another fee on the first floor. So if you ever wonder why my bedside manner is the way that it is, you should have a little clue, because you just never get to the bottom of anything. Every time you think you've found the bottom of something, all of a sudden you find it goes a little bit deeper. That's what we're doing on the pension plan. In addition to that, the last thing I'll say about the pension plan is that when I applied for the job to be the 28th state treasurer, I said I'm going to preserve and strengthen the pension plan. Now, there's a lot of talk, and there's been legislation filed about North Carolina having a defined contribution plan. Even if that law were to pass today and the governor signed it tomorrow morning, like that, somebody still has to preserve and strengthen the $92 billion that's there. And that's what I intend to do. We had some very interesting things happen as we've attempted, or as we have cut these fees in the pension plan. And just let me mention one thing. Every time that we save a penny or a paper clip in this pension plan, that money does not go back to the general fund. That money stays in the pension plan for the benefit of the participants, which is what my responsibility is as the state treasurer and the fiduciary. Now let's talk a little bit about the state health plan. The state health plan has a unfunded long-term liability of $42 billion. Now you should be asking yourself, how could the pension plan be 91% funded, approximately? I think that's too aggressive, because the fundedness of this pension plan is based almost entirely on the assumed rate of return. I could make the state pension plan 100% funded in 5 seconds by taking the assumed rate of return to 7.38. But that wouldn't be realistic. Unlike the pension plan, where every single month, and I want to be sure I say this loud and clear for the audience that is here today and the ones that might be watching later. There's a little bit of conventional wisdom out there that state employees do not contribute to the defined benefit pension plan. Nothing could be further from the truth. Every single month that every state employee has worked as a state employee in North Carolina, 6% of their salary has come out for the pension plan. The employer that they work for, about 10%, has been going in there to the pension plan on their behalf, and then that money is expected to grow over that period of time. Now I want you to think about the state health plan, which has a $42 billion liability. Now, people are eligible for lifetime health care benefits in North Carolina state employees. But unlike the pension plan, no money, zero money has ever been put aside for that purpose. As a matter of fact, I was so evangelical about this in 2005 when I joined the legislature that I filed a piece of legislation asking for $100 million to start going toward this liability. And that obviously didn't go anywhere. The next year, I filed a piece of legislation to put $100 toward this $30 billion liability, because all I wanted them to do is acknowledge that there's a problem. And of course, that bill didn't go anywhere either. I asked Cynthia one time, my wife, I said, what do people think about for the first 60 seconds that they hear me talk? And she said, they're asking themselves, is he serious? Because some of the things I'm saying are so shocking to you, even those in this room that are in the know and know a lot about a lot of things with state government, nobody really realized that we had this multi-billion-dollar liability building up. And I said, what do they think about for the second 60 seconds that they heard me talk? She said, they wonder how we got there. And how we got there is, number one, on the pension plan from this graph, which I just showed you. And the second reason we got there is that we had people eligible for this state health plan for decades, 30 and 40 years. Legislators, government officials knew that they were eligible for these plans for decades, and no money was ever put aside for them for that eligibility. Now, you might want to step back and give those people the benefit of the doubt and say, well, who would have known? Well, the fact is that 29 years ago, the city of Winston-Salem figured this out under a chief financial officer by the name of Lars Coakley, who went to the city council and said, guys and girls, because we got a problem here. We're promising that people will have health care as city employees for the rest of their life, but there's no money being put aside. So Lars Coakley got the city council of Winston-Salem to start putting aside millions and millions and millions of dollars every year, Corey, and then that money's been growing. So the city of Winston-Salem, and don't hold me to these numbers, you normally can, has about an $83 million liability, and they have almost $50 million sitting in the bank for that. And then Mayor Vinroot from Charlotte saw what was going on in Winston-Salem, and then Charlotte started doing the same thing. So don't ever think for a moment that no one saw this coming, because there are examples in North Carolina of cities and counties who understood that this thing was going to be happening, and they didn't want to be in the situation that the state finds itself in. The state health plan. Part of my responsibility as a fiduciary is to have a health plan that is in a financially sustainable manner. And that's what I'm about the business of doing. What we have in the state health plan is the expenditure for the state health plan this year is most likely going to exceed the amount of money appropriated to the university system. Not pension cost, not cost of debt for the bonds, not anything else that goes on in my department, just the state health plan is going to require a larger appropriation than the entire university system. Now, I know there are a lot of really high IQ people in this room, and you need to understand that part of the money that gets appropriated to the university system comes back to me because I manage the health plan for the university system. But the fact is that gives you an idea of what trajectory this is on. As a matter of fact, just the pension and the health care are going to require $4.4 billion of appropriation every year for the next 15 years, and that's if we're lucky. So what are we finding in the health plan? What we're finding is I have three groups of people. I have the Medicare eligible retirees, the 65-year-olds. We're doing okay with them. But the only reason we're doing okay with them is that we have a fantastic Medicare Advantage product offered to us by United. But most of these costs are being borne by Medicare through the federal government. But then we have the group that's my age, the 50 to 65-year-olds. And not only do we lose every dollar of premium that we take in for that group, but we lose 75 cents on top of every one of those premium dollars. And the reason is that people, if you roll in all of your sick leave and you graduate from college at the age of 22, you can retire from the state at 50, 51, or 52 years of age. And for that entire period of time that you're retired but not yet Medicare eligible, that's costing the state health plan, we're paying full boat on that. And then you have the young people, some of whom are the age of people in this room. We don't really have any of them on the state health plan. As a matter of fact, our family coverage, out of 800,000 people in the state health plan, we have one of the lowest participations of families in the United States. And the reason is that if you're a beginning teacher, a beginning trooper, a beginning prison guard, or a beginning state employee, chances are that if you choose the family premium, you're going to have to work 5 days out of every 20 to pay the family premium. Not energy, not housing, not food, just to pay the family premium. You know, it's a little bit of a reach to use the word tragedy when you're starting to talk about finance. But it's a tragedy when the people that are closest to you than anyone else in this state crime and public safety, teachers. It's a tragedy that they're involved in a state health plan that cannot do it better and more efficiently on their behalf so that they can afford to insure their families. And by the way, it's not just enough to say you have insurance. You have to be able to afford to get sick, even if you have the card. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to reduce complexity of the state health plan and build value for all the state employees and retirees. We're walking a tightrope. It's a mathematical tightrope. It's not political and it's not emotional. It's mathematical. We have a very small window of opportunity, in my opinion, to start subsidizing family premiums and start getting young, healthy people back on the state health plan so that we can have the average age of the state health plan, instead of continuing to do like this, to start to do like this. I think if we do that, we have an opportunity to preserve and strengthen the state health plan. Now, when I was introduced, I was talked about that I've been in the news a lot lately. So let me cover a couple of those subjects. The first thing that I've been in the news about is something called an eligibility audit. I have been in Raleigh for 13 years, and until recently, I've never been asked to verify that my wife is my wife or my kids are my kids for the state health plan. This state health plan has the responsibility for insuring almost 900,000 lives in North Carolina. And I've never been asked to verify. So I pushed for this when I was in the legislature, and in 2011, Treasurer Cowell did what they call an eligibility audit. By the way, Forsyth County does an eligibility audit every year as the county employer. So this is the official eligibility audit that was produced in 2011 from previous Treasurer Cowell. The reason I'm holding this up is that we had 2,000 people who voluntarily self-certified that they weren't supposed to be on the plan. So I'm catching a lot of grief in the newspaper, as you've probably heard and read, and from some professors who are saying that they're going to be in Europe all winter, all summer, and it's really inconvenient for them to scan into a birth certificate or a first page of their tax return. But the fact is that when this audit was done in 2011, all the information associated with this, I don't really know where it is. It was not a living, breathing document. So rightly, people are irritated that they're having to produce another birth certificate for their 18-year-old that they had to produce 7 years ago for their 11-year-old, the same child. The fact is, this time we're doing an eligibility audit, and it's going to be a living, breathing document so that we never have to ask you for your child's birth certificate again. And the vendor that I chose to do the eligibility audit is the same vendor that does open enrollment for the state. So I'm not concerned about the security of this information. But the fact is, this is standard operating procedure. You cannot have an insurance company that can't verify who its members are, and you can't have an insurance company that just has unhealthy people in it. So those are the kinds of things that we're trying to work on. I think I'll close with a couple of comments from Democrat Auditor Beth Wood regarding the state health plan. This was just some of her findings. And I say Democrat Auditor Beth Wood because I'm getting ready to report from Republican Auditor Les Merritt, who did the same thing 3 years before. The state health plan does not have policies and procedure in place to mitigate certain risks that could result in overpayments on member medical claims. The state health plan is also at risk for overpaying medical claims because the plan has not taken action to prevent coordination of benefit errors. Lastly, the plan is at risk for overpaying medical claims because the plan's auditors do not have access. I'll say that again. The plan's auditors do not have access to the Blue Cross Blue Shield contracts and cannot independently verify that the plan receives the proper contractual discounts from the providers of health care in North Carolina. I can't stand here today and tell you that any of that stuff has been rectified since 2011. I'm sure some of it has. But the fact is that we have a long way to go to preserve and strengthen the state health plan. What does it mean when it says that it does not have, the auditors do not have access? I'm known for my props. They're getting smaller and simpler as I'm getting older. This is the red file. This is the file that exists in the state health plan, which is, by the way, the largest purchaser of health care in North Carolina and probably the largest health insurance company in North Carolina. This is the file that exists in my building that says that this is Dale Folwell, this is his date of birth, this is his social security number, and he had a physical 6 weeks ago. Ironically, I call this the blue file. This is the file that exists at Blue Cross Blue Shield that matches all this stuff together. Until 6 weeks ago, we never had access to both of these files. Now, the legislature empowered this to happen probably 2 years ago, but it wasn't done. Now, SAS has both files, GDAC has both files, but the state health plan, the ones that's actually paying the bills, has never had both files. The other thing that I was criticized for recently, Don, in the news, is for hiring people in the state health plan that have no medical experience. When I got there 150 days ago, there is no certified public accountant in the state health plan. There is no auditor in the state health plan, and there are no actuaries in the state health plan. So anyone in this room who would like to ask me a question and criticize me for hiring people who can count, assume, and figure out exactly where we are at this point in time with this, then I'll take that criticism. Solving these problems is going to make the generational difference in North Carolina's future. And it's not because I'm the 28th treasurer. It didn't matter who the 28th treasurer was going to be. If Treasurer Cowell were standing here, or my opponent, this is mathematical, and this is really happening. The other thing I'll say before I open up for questions is that this is a serious business, and what we're trying to do in honor of Governor Martin. You know, Governor Martin always admonishes us, and this is something I want you young people to really leave here with today. Doing right is rarely wrong. We're trying to figure out what's right, get it right, and keep it right. Secondly, is that close enough for government work's not going to be good enough for me. So when you read in the newspaper that you have to have a big motor to work in the treasurer's office, that means you have to go from 0 to 60 in a few seconds, and you have to be able to maintain that speed for long periods of time. That's exactly right, because these are huge issues that are facing our state. And the other thing is that as it relates to these subjects, I didn't do them. I've had some part in discovering them, but now I have the responsibility for fixing them. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, and I'm sure that through the Q&A there'll be lots of other examples that I can give you. Thank you for having me, and I'll now open it up for questions.